Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this Introduction to the Basics webinar presented by the Digital Analytics Program. My name's Tim Loudon. I'm the DAP Program Manager, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Freddie Blicker. And together, we're going to be your captains on this journey to learn some of the basics about Google Analytics and also specifically what the DAP account of Google Analytics looks like compared to other GA accounts that you might have used before. So again, thanks for joining us. I'm going to go over a few rules here, not rules, but a few topics before we actually get started. The first is we will be monitoring the chat box, and I have it open here, and you can see some folks are already have already started typing. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box, and from there, we will be monitoring and answering questions. While I'm speaking, Freddie will be in the chat, making sure things are going smoothly. And when Freddie's speaking, vice versa, I will be chatting in the chat box. So we'll save broader questions for the entire group in the Q&A section. And if they're individual questions, hopefully we can either try to answer them directly in the chat or we can connect with you offline and try to answer those. Secondly, there will be, well, I guess I should just say, this is one of our long webinars, so we appreciate you logging in with us. This is sort of our base webinar. We schedule it for 3 hours. It probably won't go for 3 hours, but it will definitely go somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. Our other webinars on more specific topics are 1 hour long, but this one is really designed to get you off the ground. So if you are a beginner, either maybe you've never logged into Google Analytics before, or you've just started and you don't feel like you've got a good grasp, this is the training for you. This is not designed for folks who are super advanced. We have other trainings for that. But there will be a couple breaks in between to allow you to make a coffee or use the restroom or do whatever you need to do. And we'll try to space those out evenly so that you won't be sitting for an hour and a half without being able to get up. Lastly, we will be sending out a survey and email with resources after the webinar is over. So you'll get some information about our past recorded trainings and some different blogs and things like that, as well as the survey, which we would really, really appreciate if you take a few minutes to fill out. I think it probably takes about a minute and a half, but it does help us make sure that we are creating webinars that meet your needs. Whew, okay. Now that that's all over, let's go ahead and get started. So we've got the introduction to the basics. Starting out, what is the Digital Analytics Program? You're going to hear me use the term DAP because it's not fun to say Digital Analytics Program every time I'm referring to the program. And also you can see my slide is repetitive because it says the Digital Analytics Program. We'll leave it as it is. But DAP is basically the federal government's initiative to aggregate web traffic to federal websites, as well as provide analytics support, such as this training, to agencies. So the program consists of offering the tool itself, the DAP Google Analytics account. We at GSA, we pay for what used to be called Google Analytics Premium. Now it's called Analytics 360. It's the paid version of Google Analytics, which does not have a what they call a hit cap. Also has some other benefits that we'll talk about soon, but we offer it to the other agencies at no cost. We also have training such as this. This is obviously our introductory training, but we go into more specific topics and have advanced trainings as well. And we record all those and put them on our YouTube channel. You can find a previous iteration of this introductory webinar on our YouTube channel right now. We also have all our future training on our events page. Our next training after this one next month is going to be quite advanced. It's on writing custom JavaScript for tag managers. If you're interested in that, please tune in. We also offer implementation and reporting support, and that's via our email address, dap@support.digitalgov.gov. And Freddie is our lead customer support person. So some of you may have interacted with him before. And between the two of us, we make up the entire DAP team. We try to do our best to help you figure out implementation, and also if you need help reporting, if you want to create a specific custom report in the future and you can't figure it out, or you're looking to find maybe the amount of times a certain PDF was downloaded and you're having trouble, we're always here to help you out. And finally, we manage analytics.usa.gov, which is the public window into some of the data that you can see in the Google Analytics interface. But the Google Analytics interface is much more robust and dynamic, whereas analytics.usa.gov is more of a straightforward dashboard. Okay, how does the DAP Google Analytics account differ from the one that you may use, that you may have used in the past, or maybe you also have a separate, what we call independent Google Analytics account at your agency with the website that you work on? Obviously, DAP is provided by GSA. It uses the premium version of GA. We pay for it as opposed to the free version. So the premium version has some benefits. It does not have what we call the hit cliff. The free version of Google Analytics, if your site gets a lot of traffic, it will stop recording after 10 million hits per month. And a hit is a little bit of a nebulous thing. A hit is either an event that triggers or a page view, basically. So if you hit 10 million, it'll all of a sudden stop recording. If you hit 10 million on the 12th day of the month, you have 18 days of the month where you have no data. As opposed to the paid version, you don't have those limits. Also, some benefits of the paid version is that you have the option to do unsampled reporting. Now that comes into play when, especially if you're trying to draw data for a longer time period than a month or maybe at most a quarter. And I know that as we're coming into the middle of August here, come September, a lot of you are going to be looking to try to get annual numbers, and that's where unsampled reporting is going to be very beneficial, because in your free Google Analytics account, your reporting will probably be sampled at a very high rate, and you won't be able to unsample it. Whereas with the DAP account, you can unsample. Okay, also, we've got the common tag page code. So it's a single Google Analytics account where all the data from all the participating websites pours in. And currently, we've got approximately 5,500 websites that are reporting data into a single Google Analytics account. We've kind of found a way to make that work. It's not how Google Analytics was intended to be used, but it works for our purposes. Profiles are created at the agency level. So this is a big one. If you have an independent Google Analytics account, you probably had what used to be called profiles and now are called views. You probably had views set up at the single website level. But because of the way our program is structured, we have views set up at the agency level, meaning that, and you'll see this when I go into the account and show you, all of the websites for any particular agency are pouring data into that agency's profile in our system. So it's either all the websites for the Department of Education or the Department of Treasury or General Services Administration and so on. So this requires that you do, in order to get information for a specific website, you may need to use segments or custom reports, and we're going to show you how to do that. Another thing with the DAP GA is that you can't link it with Search Console. You can link Search Console in with your independent GA. And we, to be honest, recommend that you not only use DAP, but you also have a separate independent GA account on your website so that you can get both the benefits of the Analytics 360 that DAP provides and the insight into the rest of the agency's traffic and things like that. But you can also do some custom integrations with things like Search Console in your independent GA account. Okay, DAP can be run concurrently with your own GA. That's a good thing since we recommend you do both. And it's designed to roll up data for agencies and collect government-wide metrics and trends. Your own GA, probably if you have it, it's a free version. I think maybe there are only a half dozen or so paid versions of Google Analytics throughout the federal executive branch. Some folks are lucky enough to have their own. Some non-DAP compatible features are available, such as Search Console. And you can create your own profiles and you manage the user management and so on. For DAP, we manage the user management and all the settings, and we do things like turn on the bots and spiders filter, anonymize IP addresses, turn all the necessary privacy and security knobs for you. Okay, moving on. That's the difference between the DAP.GA account and any other ones you may have worked on, or the one that you currently work on if it's not the government-wide DAP account. So let's talk about what Google Analytics is. This is like sort of the Wikipedia entry here. A service offered by Google that generates detailed statistics about a website's traffic and traffic sources and yada, yada, yada. Basically, Google Analytics is JavaScript that records a bunch of information about a visit from a specific user. And it does that because when you travel to a website, the analogy I like to use is, as you travel from website to website, you travel around with this backpack on. And Google Analytics rips open your backpack and finds all the things you have in it. And inside that backpack, it's got information about where you just came from, how long you're on the site, what pages you're viewing on the site, what kind of device you're on, what browser you're on, where your relative location is, and so on and so on. So what Google does is it opens up that backpack and records all the data. Google Analytics is driven, all the data in Google Analytics is driven into two categories. These two categories make up any piece of data that you can find in GA. The first one is dimension, and the second one is metric. And having an understanding of dimensions and metrics is going to be the cornerstone of you being able to create your own custom reports and understand how everything works. So basically, it's pretty straightforward. A metric is a measurement, and therefore, a metric is always a number. So it might be page views, which the amount of time a page was viewed, that's a number. It might be sessions. It might be time on page, because it's a measurement of time. Various different things. Bounces. We're going to learn what bounces are later, but they're things that you can count. Dimensions, on the other hand, describe data. So that would be something that would not have. We used to say if it's not a number, it's a dimension, but there is a weird case where there's a dimension that is a number, and that's when you use the category or the dimension month. Instead of saying January, February, March, it lists month by 01, 02, 03. So they're a number, but they're not trying to count. It's just basically a proxy for January, February, March. So here's a little chart. And you can see here we've got some examples of metrics and dimensions. Now, I want to just be clear that area in square miles and population is not a metric that is part of Google Analytics. It's just to show you the difference between a dimension and a metric. But city, in fact, is a dimension that is in Google Analytics. So the dimension of city would be, okay, San Francisco, with a metric of area in square miles, 231, and a population of 8,000. Google Analytics, if you have a dimension and different metrics, it will show you a different row for every unique combination of those things. So in this case, we have a dimension and two metrics. Every unique combination will get its own row. And this will make more sense as we go into some other reports. Okay, now, we haven't discussed a whole lot about terminology yet, but these are somewhat straightforward. I apologize if you don't know what all these are yet, but I want you to, in your head, read this question. Which of these is a metric? A, social source, B, landing page, C, pages per session, or D, month of year. And in your head, think about which one is a metric. 3 of them are a dimension, 1 of them is a metric. Okay? For those of you that picked letter C, pages per session, you are correct. So a social source is a source of traffic coming from social media. So an example of what the return for social source might be could be Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. So that's a descriptor. It's describing the source. Landing page is the first page of a session. So it means when you land in a website, the first page you see is the landing page. So in this case, that would be a specific URL. A landing page would be a URL, which is not something that we count. Month of the year, that's the example I gave you. You could use 1, 2, 3, or 4, or January, February, March, April, but it's a descriptor. whereas pages per session is something that we can count. How many pages did the person view while they were in visiting that specific website? So for those of you that picked C, good job. Okay, let's talk about some terminology, because before we get into the actual interface, it's important to understand some of the terms. And I'm not going to do an exhaustive review of all the different terms. There are a lot of terms in Google Analytics. It does take some practice to get to know them. But there are a few I think that are very important to understand what they mean and what their little caveats are, because everything has its own little tricks. And understanding what those are makes sure that you're presenting your data in the most accurate way. So the first one, if we're looking at sort of a pyramid approach, the most granular part of the pyramid here is a page view. And that's anytime a page loads, it's a page view. So let's do an example here. I can go over and I can load USA.gov. The fine folks who run USA.gov work in our division here at GSA in the Tech Transformation Services. So we got the page that loaded. When this page loads, the browser reads the JavaScript or reads all the HTML, sees the JavaScript for the Google Analytics code, and then Google Analytics records its information. So this is a page view. Now the questions I get are always like, well, what happens if I refresh the page? Well, the page reloaded. So a refresh constitutes a page view. And then sometimes I get the question, what happens if I go somewhere, like if I go to branches of the US government, and then I say, oh, that's the wrong page, and I go back, hit the back button. That is also a page view. So now in just what I've shown you in the last few seconds, the USA.gov homepage has recorded 3 page views. The first time I landed on it, when I hit refresh, and then when I went somewhere else and hit back. The page loaded 3 times. That's going to register as 3 page views in Google Analytics. So that's the most granular form of a non-interaction thing. Like we'll talk later about events and how you can get reports on clicks of specific links or buttons or things like that. But in terms of just surfing, this is the most granular form. Okay? Next, a session. So a session, a long time ago, back maybe now, they probably changed this maybe 6 or 7 years ago now. Formerly, it was called a visit. But many years, well, not many, but 6 years ago or whatever, we woke up one day and they changed a bunch of the terminology, and it's been called session ever since. But it makes sense if you think about it in as a visit. A session is the entire time someone is on the site. It may be made up of many page views. So when I'm at this USA.gov, I could go here and look at Find Government Forms. I could go other places on the site, Social Security questions, all these various different things. I'm seeing many page views, but only one session because I'm still within USA.gov. And that's important to understand. One thing that's also important to understand about DAP is that by default, DAP records any new domain as a new site. So if you are an agency where you have subdomains, so for example, I know that, for example, like publications.usa.gov exists. I won't go there. But if we were to go to publications.usa.gov, from somewhere a link on this page, it would start a new session and end the old session because by default, DAP records second level domains and subdomains as separate websites. And there's a lot of reasoning for that, and I can describe it to you more in detail if you're interested if you email us afterward. But in a session, I could have 100 page views, but I might only have 1 page view. It's just from when I enter a domain, in this case USA.gov, to when I leave that domain. So if I were to go down here and let's see, if I click here, I then go to gobierno.usa.gov, which is the Spanish version of USA.gov. And now I've started a new session here and ended my previous session on USA.gov. Okay, so now we got We went from the peak of the pyramid, now that was the middle, so you can have many page views per session, and then we get to user. So user is formerly known as a visitor. So that is theoretically a person who visits a site. So in the same way that you can have many page views per session, you can have many sessions per user. And once a user returns to a site, so upon a second time that they've created a session in that site, they are referred to as a returning user. There are many caveats to this particular metric, counting users. That's why I've got my little guy falling in the manhole here. It's like the pitfall guy. Be careful when talking about users because it's not always humans. It doesn't mean if you have 10,000 users that you had 10,000 people visit your site. And the reason for that is the way users are determined is via cookies. So when I visit gobierno.usa.gov, the Google Analytics script puts a cookie in the browser that says, okay, this person has been here. Then if I go away and tomorrow I come back to this, the browser can see my cookie and Google Analytics sees the cookie and says, oh, they were here yesterday, they're back again, they're a returning user. Meaning I would be just still one user, even though I would have 2 sessions over the 2 days. The problem with that is that cookies are only stored on your particular browser on your machine. So if I viewed this exact page on my work computer and then my home computer and then my personal phone and my work phone, the cookies aren't able to tell that that's all Tim Loudon's uh, machines. So it would register me as 4 users. And in this case, 4 new users, because if I was the first time visiting with each one of those devices, I would be 4 new users. So my caveat about that is this. If you are using user as a metric that you're reporting on, be very careful about how you frame it. Don't set a goal, for example, for your site to have 50,000 users thinking that means 50,000 people visited your site. Instead, if you're going to use user, and I'll just state right here that I prefer to use session as my sort of main guiding metric. But if you're going to use user, I recommend that you use it in the sense of percentage increase or decrease. Because user is calculated the same way month over month. It just doesn't represent what it sounds like it represents. But if you say, hey, we had a 10% increase in users this quarter, that's not trying to make a false claim about the amount of humans. It's measured the same way, so you probably did have a 10% increase, both in humans and in the specific user metric. Okay, one last thing I wanted to cover before I move away from this slide. I forgot to mention one of the questions that I get with regard to session is often, well, what happens in today's day and age when I'm using Google Chrome and you see I've got all these tabs open? What happens when I'm on this site and I click on something and it opens in a new tab and this particular page stays open but it's idle for a long time? The answer to that is there is a session timeout, an automatic session timeout after 30 minutes of inactivity. So if I were to leave this tab open but idle for 35 minutes, and then I come back and I click on something, and when I click on something, it runs the Google Analytics script again, it would record as a new session. It would be 2 sessions, even though I never really closed the page, but I left it inactive long enough that the session timed out. So 30-minute by default session timeout if you leave the page open. Okay. 3 more, and then we'll get into some of the meat of the deals here. So a bounce rate. Now this is a metric that I feel like when someone first starts out using Google Analytics, the metric they want first is page views. And page views, we have a whole slide about this, but I'll just kind of spoil it. Page views on their own are not a determiner of success of your website. So if all you're looking at is page views, you don't know whether or not people are achieving the things that you want them to achieve on your site. So don't use only page views or only sessions or only any one metric for that matter. But I feel like once folks get a little more advanced in Google Analytics, they start worrying about bounce rate. And bounce rate is the percentage of sessions where a user lands on a page and does not view another page. In other words, a one-page session. So if I was on Google and I found I found something like I know one of the popular pages on USA.gov is the unclaimed money page. So if I was on Google and I said, how do I see if I have unclaimed money? And it led me here. And just forget that I just navigated here, but I went right from Google. If I saw this and I was like, oh, this isn't what I want, I didn't want to be there, and I leave and I go to google.com, then that would be a bounce, a one-page session. So the bounce rate is the percentage of sessions where the user lands on one page and doesn't view another. So it means that out of all the sessions, let's say in a specific day you have 100 sessions on your site, but maybe 40 of them were one-page sessions where someone left the page, your bounce rate would be 40% for that day. I do want to warn as well, though, that I don't think that bounce rate is always as big of an issue as some people think it is. And the example for that is if you have, let's say, a blog, or you have something like a press release or something very urgent that is important, where you don't really care if people view other parts of your website, then bounce rate isn't the biggest deal in the world. Like if you have the example I often use, and I don't know if we have any Park Service people on right now, but if there's some sort of press release that goes out that's saying that there's like a man-eating bear on the loose at Glacier National Park, I don't think the people at the Park Service really care if folks are browsing the rest of the Glacier site, rather than just making sure they're aware of the fact that there's a bear that they need to look out for. So a lot of people take bounce rate at a full site level, and I think that that's a mistake. I think bounce rate is very much a page level metric. If you have a high bounce rate, and I know what you're thinking, well, what's a high bounce rate, Tim? I don't know. People generally say 50% is pretty average. When you get up above 60, maybe that's not so great if it's a home page. And if you get up above 65, 70, you probably got something to worry about. You need to figure out what's going on. But if you have, let's say, a 75% bounce rate on your homepage, that's not a good sign, because the homepage is designed to direct people to other places in your site. Okay, sorry guys. Thanks for putting up with me here. We're almost through these terms. Source and medium. So this is not intended to be facetious, but a medium is a source of a traffic type, and a source specifies it. It makes more sense when you look at the examples. For example, Google/organic. Organic in Google Analytics terms means it comes from an organic search engine like Google or Bing or Yahoo, and the source is the specific one. Another example is Twitter/social. So if traffic came from a social media outlet, that's the medium. That it would be Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram, LinkedIn. And then it was specified the specific one in the source. So Google Analytics offers source/medium as a single dimension, which is pretty cool, rather than specifying only source and only medium. And the last one, referral, that's a visit to your site based on a link from a third-party site. And if you use the dimension called full referrer, it shows you the exact page from where the person came from. So if your agency website is linked from a Washington Post article tomorrow, and a bunch of people click on the Washington Post article and they get to your site, you will see that you will have a lot of referral traffic if you look in the correct report. And if you use the dimension full referrer in the report, you can then find out which page that they linked you on. And this is really helpful because a lot of times there are places out in the universe of the internet that are referring people to our websites that we don't know about. One example is in the analytics.usa.gov instance, which is the site that we run. I did a report on referrals to find out that there was a computer science course in a university in Colorado that was using our site as sort of a practice model for people to play with in the computer science class as part of the syllabus. And we were linked from their syllabus. We got a lot of traffic from that. So it's interesting to kind of find those things that you didn't know about. Okay, quick exercise. And again, I just want everyone to think in their heads as I ask these questions. And again, some of these terms we haven't gone over, but I'm gonna address them as we go. So this big blue arrow, let's say this is a single session. And we start out and we viewed page 1, and then we viewed page 2, and then we went back and viewed page 1. So encompassed in the session here, how many page views does page 1 have? If you thought 2, good job, because we got 1 page here and 1 page here. Page 1 was viewed 2 times. How many page views does page 2 have? 1, that makes sense. And how many page views in the session? 3. 3 total page views. Now, unique page views are interesting in that you can only have 1 unique page view for a specific page per session. And what this is designed to do is, if for some reason you have a site where people continuously see one specific page, but you maybe want to just not have to deal with the fact that they viewed it 20 times in a session, you can use unique page views. Personally, I don't use it very often, but how many unique page views does page 1 have? And the answer to that is 1, because you can only have 1 unique page view per session. Page 2 obviously also has 1, and across the session there were 2 unique page views. The third column here, we've got entrances. So entrances, an entrance is a metric that measures how many times a specific page was the first page of the session. And it goes with a dimension called landing page. So landing page is the dimension that shows you the URL of the page that was the first page of the session. And entrances can go with page, just a normal page dimension, to show you how many times of all the views of that page it was the first page of the session. So how many entrances does page 1 have? Everyone think in your head. 1. Because here it was the third page of the session, so it only has 1. How many entrances does page 2 have? 0. Because page 2 was never the first page of the session. And in a session, you can only ever have 1 entrance, so that's not applicable. Now, in the metric pages per session, across the entire session, in this is just 1, so we've got 3 pages per session. And you will see in Google Analytics, if you try to use this, there's average pages per session, which is used, and it will take all the sessions into account and give you the average amount of pages. Okay, so here's what we were talking about before regarding using specific metrics. Now that you understand a little bit about what some of these terms mean, a lot of people, this is what they say. They go into their boss and they say, look, we got tons of visits this month. Where's my bonus? I did a good job, right? Like, oh my gosh, we got 100,000 page views for this specific page. As I noted before, that doesn't determine success. And bounce rate is another good example of that, and we'll talk about it. So the number 1 goal for information sites is getting the right content to the right people at the right time. Now, in government, most of our sites are informational. Some of you may be working on sites that are a bit more transactional. The majority of sites are information. So how do you know if you're achieving that? And it's not just bounce rate, and it's not just page views. So we talked about what bounce rate is. You see the person theoretically comes land on the page, they're unhappy, and they leave. There's a blogger who's very famous named Avinash Kaushik. He literally wrote the book on Google Analytics, and he describes it as I came, I puked, I left. But that's not always necessarily the case. So I talked about this. It could be bad in that users didn't know what they were looking for and they left, or it could be that they found exactly what they were looking for, and that's the important thing, and then they left. But you can do this with other metrics as well. So here's an example. Pages per session, right? If you look at it glass half full, you can say users are engaged and they're clicking on all sorts of pages and reading all our content, and gosh darn it, they love our site. But if it's bad, if you're looking at it glass half empty, you could say, well, users are determined to find a specific thing that they need to do, but they can't. And this is something that is very unique to government, because we offer a lot of services that people can't get elsewhere. So as an example, if I'm looking to try to find information about renewing my passport, I need to find out where to go to renew my passport. And it might take me 50 pages in a single session before I find it. And that would be a bad thing, because it's not that I'm reading the 49 other pages, it's that I'm trying to figure out where the information I need is. So that's why we can't ever use a single metric as a sole determiner of success. And one of the things that you'll hear Freddie and I preach a lot is that you need to have a strategy which encompasses context and the goals of your site. So if your goals for your site are to get people to sign up for your newsletter or to read your content or to create an account, you need to have KPIs, uh, key performance indicators, that are descriptive of that, not just how many pages. And it's unfortunate that I feel like in a lot of cases, Google Analytics is just used to create a big report with numbers on it and send somewhere once a month, and no action is taken. But that's what we're hoping to try to steer you away from. Okay, I can take a quick look and see if there are questions so far. Oh, here we go. Let's see here. Freddie, is there anything that you think we should address right now based on that section we just did?
No, I don't think so. We did have one question about setting up segments and filters to isolate a specific section of a site, but that will come later on in the presentation today.
Great. Okay, yep, we will be covering that. So I see people are being active. Thank you for being active in the chat. And Freddie, thanks for answering questions that you can in the chat. Okay, we'll keep moving on because I gotta keep cruising here. So now we're gonna get our hands dirty. We're gonna actually take a look at some of the reports. So I want you first to get sort of comfortable with the interface. I just as a caveat here, I don't think that you need to be trying to follow along with me in this case. I'm going to be showing you things, and in a lot of cases, I think if you try to follow along, you might click away for a second, and I click somewhere, and you might lose me. So just for now, take a look at what I'm doing. And again, we've got recordings of this webinar that are up on our YouTube channel, and if you need to, you can go back and be able to pause and follow through. But I'm going to do a bit of just demo here. So the first thing that you'll see when you go to analytics.google.com, when you log in, is that it will bring you to, actually now it brings you to this page, the home page. Previously, it used to bring you to this thing called the audience overview. So a couple things we need to take note of right off the bat. Number one, are you in the DAP account or a different account? So if you look up here, it says Digital Analytics Program, government-wide account, and I'm particularly in the HUD profile right now. If I click on this, I can go to any of the agency profiles, and you should always do reporting in your specific profile and not in the GovWide main reporting profile, because you'll get less sampling problems if you use your own agency profile. But also, if you have access to other accounts, you can click over here and click on other accounts that you may have access to and enter them there. But one thing to be sure before you message us with questions is, are you asking us about the DAP account? Because sometimes people say, I can't figure out how to do something, and they're not using our account, they're using another account, and it's hard for us to troubleshoot if we don't have access. So, there's that. I'm in the HUD profile in the DAP account. The other thing to look at right when you log in is over here in the top right, which account you're signed in with. So you can see I'm signed in with my gsa.gov account, timothy.loudon@gsa.gov. If you are logged into your personal Gmail account and you try to go into DAP and you can't find out why that's not happening, it's probably because you only have access granted with your government account. So you always want to make sure that you're using the correct account logged in. And those of you that are DAP users, you know that many of you, if your agency doesn't use Google by default, you have to associate your .gov address with Google so that we can grant you access to DAP. Okay, I'm actually not going to talk too much about the home report, although it is interesting. I will say this: I think that one of the most valuable reports, in my opinion, is this one. When do your users visit? So this is previously something that was pretty hard for us to do in the, you could do it in the reports and visualize it yourself, but they do a nice job of visualizing it for you here. where you can see in the last 30 days, when are the most people visiting. And for HUD, it looks like Mondays and Tuesdays between 10 and 4 are the hottest times. And unbeknownst to me, why Google decided to do this all in shades of blue, but I'm not sure how that goes in terms of 508 standards and contrast. Probably fails, but we don't have the ability to change that in this interface. So that's an interesting report, but it also just gives you a summary of some various different things where people are coming from in terms of your different traffic channels, and you can take a look at that there. I'd actually like to just start off here in the audience overview section, which is where it used to start you at. So in the audience overview, let's look at some different things here. Firstly, the date picker is up in the upper right-hand corner. You can choose the date range of the last month, and it will give me all of July. I can choose the date range of the last 30 days, and it will give me the last 30 days starting yesterday. You can do a custom date range where you could pick here and say, I started a campaign on July 5th, and I want to know all the traffic from the 5th up until now. I can hit apply for that. Also, what's cool is, let's say I do the last 7 days. You have this option to hit compare to, and if you hit compare to, it will then show you the previous period. So it'll show me the last 7 days in blue and the 7 days before that in orange. And I'll demonstrate that really quickly. They're almost even, but you can see the lines are overlapping here. So let me just try expanding the date range a little bit. If I do last 30 days, and then I compare it to the previous period, we'll have difference in weekends. So there you go. So you can see here that the blue is the last 30 days, and the orange is the 30 days before that. And what's cool about using this compare feature is that for many of the overview reports, it will not only give you the numbers, but it automatically does calculation for you in percent improve or increase or decrease. So in the most recent 30 days, users increased 7%, new users increased in sessions, and so on and so on. So this can be really beneficial. And once you set this date range, it will hold as you go throughout any of the other reports. So I could click over here and check into some other things, but that will be there. Other things to notice, obviously, the left-hand bar here. We've got home. Customization is where we'll go later. That's where we do custom reports and dashboards. There's real time, and that will show you how many people are on your site at the moment, on all your sites in this case, because again, this encompasses all HUD participating websites. So right now, across all of HUD sites that participate in DAP, there are 874 users. The real-time reports are cool if you have a big event and you know that you're going to get a lot of traffic. It's kind of fun to just watch and see, like, oh, look at the jump from after we released this press release or something like that. And hopefully it's a press release for a good reason and not a not good reason. But in terms of real-time reporting, I don't actually use it that much for analysis. It's more of like a cool added feature. Now, what we've got over here and what we're going to show you some of are the audience reports telling you about who your users are, the acquisition reports telling you about where your users came from, the behavior reports telling you about what they did on your site. And we're going to go over a few of those reports today. I'm not going to go over all the reports because the webinar would be even longer, and we don't want to take up any more of your time. But we are going to touch on some of the more important ones in these categories. So the first one that I want to talk about is the all pages report. So we're going to skip in front of some of these other things, and Freddie's going to show you some stuff about acquisition in the next section. But I'm going to be over here in the behavior section. I'm going to open the behavior accordion, and then within site content, we've got the all pages report. And this is sort of, the baseline report when everyone starts looking at Google Analytics. So here we've got all the different pages. And so the dimension is page, and all of these columns are the metrics. And you can see here that this little arrow means that currently it's ordering these pages in descending order by page view. But I can also click on other things, like if I wanted to click on average time on page, I could click there, and it would then resort all the data in the chart to go in descending order from average time on page. Something you will find about looking at something like average time on page is that, see, like for example, this says people are here for an hour and 21 minutes, which is a long time, but it's based on 9 page views. So you have to be making sure, and all of these are based on 1 page view, you have to be making sure that you're taking into account the statistical significance of some of these things if you are, looking at some of these specific metrics and sorting that way. In the case of the home page, the average time on page is 1:07, and it's based on 494,000 page views. So that's pretty reliable. You can also see here the entrances. So of the almost 500,000 total page views, 300,000 times it was the first page of the session. Now, that makes sense for a home page. But you can see here, like this is kind of interesting. This is public Indian housing page. Not only the second most viewed page, but 170,000 of the 275,000 times it was viewed, it was the first page people landed on, which means that people got there from using either a referral from another site or by searching for something on Google, and they got led there. And they also spend a lot of time on this particular page. 6 minutes is a very high number for average time on page. So people are engaged with this page, and they're also searching for it via organic search. And the bounce rate is medium. You can see here the homepage has a bounce rate of 33%. That's fantastic. That you can pretty much assume you're going to get a third bounce rate even on home pages, because that's just the way the web works. But you can see here some of these are a little bit higher. For the most part, in the top 10, all of these are pretty low bounce rate. So let's look at what we can do with this report. We've obviously got only 10 rows here, but this little button, you can expand it up to 5,000 rows. And here we can see there are actually 34,883 rows, meaning that using the dimension of page in the All Pages report, there are almost 35,000 unique pages where there was a page view. So we can only view 5,000 at a time, but we could expand it to 5,000 and then click through. What's another thing we can do here? Let's say I wanted to see a very specific page. And I have not prepared this in advance, so I'm just going to try to do it on the fly. But if I wanted to just see the information for a specific page, I could go up here in the section with the search bar. And what this will do is if I type in anything, it will search for whatever I type in the dimension. So in this case, page refers to the URL. So I'm going to hope that HUD has some pages that mention states somewhere. And I'm going to try to type in Alabama. And it might come up with nothing. Oh, there we go. So here are all the pages that contain the word Alabama. So it's got general information about housing in Alabama. It's got renting, home ownership, and so on and so on. So if you have a specific page that you want to find, you can, rather than having to just search for it via, all the 34,000 pages that you would have to look for, you can just quick type it in right here, type in some word that you know is in the URL, or you could even copy and paste the URL in here to find a specific page. But one thing to note is that if you're copying and pasting URLs, note that DAP does not include HTTP or HTTPS or www. So if your site is www.hud.gov, do not put www.hud.gov in the search box, because it will come up with nothing. Oh, it won't in this case because it actually has some weird things where it's got some 404 pages where it contains that. But you won't find the actual normal page if you type that in. The initial domain does not include www in DAP. Okay, another cool trick that you can do with this particular report is use secondary dimension. So secondary dimension here is this box. Now you can see here in our report, we've got a single dimension, page, and it's followed by all these metrics. So if we wanted to add another dimension into this and make the report a little more granular, we can do that with this button. So once you get used to, oh, this is new, the commonly used ones. Once you get used to all the different dimensions that Google Analytics offers, you'll start to be able to just type them in. But let's say in this case, I was interested in knowing which state people were visiting these pages from. There are a few different dimensions that relate to location in Google Analytics. There's subcontinent, continent, country, city, and there's a dimension called region. And the reason I want to tell you about region is because that's how you get to state. The reason why Google Analytics does not offer a dimension called state is because not every country has states. Canada has provinces, Japan has prefectures, and so on and so on. So instead, they use the term region, and when you're in the US, region refers to state. So I'm going to type in region and watch what happens here with this report. So now you can see that previously HUD.gov was the most visited single page, but it had, I don't know, probably over 1 million page views. Now you can see HUD.gov is broken up based on the secondary dimension that I set. So every unique combination of a row gets its own row. So now we've got HUD from California constitutes the most page views in this, with the way we've set up this report. HUD from visiting HUD.gov from Texas is number 2, and then we've got and so on and so on. And so this is pretty interesting here. One of the things that is interesting is that I don't see that second page that we saw yet. Wow, it's probably way down here. So this must be visited across many different states, that second page that we saw about, there it is, the public Indian housing. So it may be up here that I missed it. Here's one here from Massachusetts with 10,000. But what's interesting is that we see that that was the second most viewed page, but it was spread across many different states, which was the reason why it's not appearing way up in the front here. Oh, here's California. It's right there. But this is a way, and you can add any dimension there. You could separate it by browser, by device type, which would tell you if people were visiting on mobile devices or desktops or tablets, and so on and so on. One last thing I need to show you with the all pages report. If I get rid of this secondary dimension for region, and let's say I click on buying a home. If I isolate a specific page in the all pages report, I can then click up here, this is like a secret. I didn't know about this report until like 3 years after starting to work in Google Analytics. But they hid it on me here. If you click navigation summary after you isolate a specific page, it will then give you this really great report where it shows you, here's my buying a home page, and we're imagining this is it right here, this little icon. 11.26% of all page views were entrances, but 88.74% of the page views came from previous pages in this date range. And what were the previous pages? Well, 50% of people came from the home page, 15% came from the /buying/loans page, and so on and so forth. So you get to see not only, you've got the total amount of page views, but you get to see how many or where people came from within the site and what percentage of them came directly to that page before they got to the buying a home page. And then similarly, we can then see where they went afterward. So after they saw the buying a home page, 20% of them exited the site, but 80% of them stayed within the site and they clicked on these links within the site to go elsewhere. So they went to either the rental assistance page or the homes for sale page, and so on and so forth. So this is a really cool report for you to get to understand a little bit about the user journey and the user flow throughout your site. All right, I think I got to pick up the pace here, trying to show you all those cool tricks. Okay, the other report I want to show you quickly in the behavior section is the landing page report. So over here under behavior, we had all pages. 2 down from that, we've got landing pages. Now, this is the report where it shows you the specific page as a landing page, meaning we've already determined that this is how many times, this is the page that was landed on the first page of the session. So in all pages where we saw entrances, remember I told you there was a dimension that goes along with it, and that's landing page. Landing page, we automatically know that it was the first page of the session. And what this does is tells you how many times, how many sessions it was the first page of the session. So this, in some cases, now in this case, it looks pretty much the same, but in some cases, the landing page will be different than the most viewed page total with all page views. And this is where I think you can look at bounce rate. So when we started over in the audience overview, it gave some basic stats. Like I'll go here. It gives some basic stats right off the bat for the site. Well, not even site, but profile wide, right? The view. So across all the websites here, we had 1.4 million users in this time frame, and so on, and we had a 53.8% bounce rate. Okay, take it from me. Do not use this bounce rate as something that you report on, because it's not only is it not even showing you for one site in this case, because the DAP account includes many sites, but it's also showing you across an array of pages, and you don't really know which ones were meant to be used as pages to direct people to other content. So I'm going to go back down into behavior and go to the landing page report. And I would recommend that this is where you look at bounce rate, because now you can say, okay, when people landed directly, let me find one that's somewhat high. Here you go, 77%. So when somebody landed on the Hope 1 program description page, you know that this is the first page of the session. So they 36,000 sessions, this was the first page of the session, meaning either they were being referred from somewhere or it was probably organic traffic. And you know what? We can even figure out what that is, because we can use a secondary dimension. So I'm going to isolate this, and I'm going to use a secondary dimension of source medium. My guess is it's going to be a lot of Google traffic. Of course, GA decides it wants to take a while. So here we go. So 90% of all the sessions where this was the first page of the session came from Google. So it's getting a lot of Google traffic. But the bounce rate when visits come from Google to this page is, 77%. So that gives you an opportunity to figure out and to look at information about your SEO and how people are getting there. Now, maybe I haven't been to this page. Maybe this page is just designed for someone to read and go away. And if that's the case, then maybe you don't care about that bounce rate. It's just an informational page about that particular program. It doesn't have many links on it that say, click here for more information or anything like that. If this page in particular was something that it was important that people click through to get more information or sign up or view nearby events or something like that, then this might be a case where if the bounce rate is higher, you want to figure out why that is. And again, I'm not saying that this page is has anything wrong with it. I haven't been to the page. I'm just looking at it in the sense of it had a bit of a higher bounce rate, and that's where you need to assess whether or not that meets what you're hoping users to do or it doesn't. Okay. What did I do here? I clicked on something. So that's the landing pages report. Just one thing that we've noted here, and this is a pretty old statistic, but in 2015, only 26% of landing pages were home pages and 74% were other pages. So if you're still in the mindset that people are supposed to start at your site on a home page, I'm sorry to inform you that that is generally not the case anymore. It may be that your homepage gets 50% of the landing pages, is 50% of the landing page sessions, but the majority of traffic these days is coming in what we call sideways. So generally from organic search engines or from social media or things like that are directing people to somewhere further down the directory path than a home page. So I spoke about this. You can combine it with bounce rate, get some information. You can also add secondary dimensions to help you understand where they're coming from, how they get there, and if that requires any extra attention from you. Perfect. It's 2:02. I'm doing okay. We're going to take a 5-minute break. So you have a couple options here. You could make yourself some coffee. You could use the restroom. You could answer emails, or you could just hang out and watch this panda cub waking up at the Toronto Zoo. Although I don't think it's only 45 seconds long. So let's regroup here at 2:08, and we'll get started again. And my colleague Freddie is going to take you through the second section of our webinar.
Okay, hey folks, I think we are ready to get started again. Let's give people a couple minutes and we'll get started. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so this is one of my favorite sections of the webinar. We're starting to get into events reporting, better understand the who and how of your data. But first, we're going to start to talk about how you briefly can use the events report to figure out what your visitors are downloading. So that's typically a question that we get from a lot of new DAP users. So I think the next section here is really going to be beneficial for those of you who are brand new to DAP and you're trying to understand how people are engaging with your website content. So let's jump in. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the top events report. So I'm going to go into DAP, and I'm using the HUD agency profile for this example. And just to kind of step back a little bit, events are simply interactions with content on your site. So typically these can include PDF downloads, link clicks, email clicks, any type of interaction with Flash or Ajax. So these are things that DAP automatically tracks out of the box. So this is really one of the biggest benefits to you as a DAP user, is that in the background, when anyone is visiting your site, DAP is automatically tracking any type of user interaction with content like the list that I just gave you. So PDFs, link clicks, email clicks, outbound links, etc. So this is really helpful in helping you better understand how people are consuming your content and interacting with it. So I'm going to navigate to behavior, and then I'm going to navigate to the events section. And I'm going to go to top events. And we're going to spend just a little bit of time here going through the thought process and what's available to you in this report. So when I'm looking at my website and I'm trying to figure out how many PDF files are people downloading, this is where I want to go. This is the top events report. Now, as Tim showed in other reports previously when he was presenting, this report, the top events report, has all the same functionality. It has the date picker, has the ability to add segments. It has the ability to add a secondary dimension. You can search your primary dimension using filters, etc. Now, when you go into top events, you're going to see event category, where my cursor is, event action, and event label. Now, Google Analytics does a really good job of drilling down into the various data sets that we collect in DAP about user interactions with content. So to find out how many events are occurring for downloads of PDFs, you would simply click on download. Now, this drills down really quickly into all of the different types of files that are automatically tracked as downloads in DAP Google Analytics. This is captured under the event action label. So this is where you would go. You would just simply drill down, and I'm just going to repeat that for everyone. You go into event category. This is going to be what's default. And then you click into download. And then you're presented with your event action. And then you can see PDF, doc, docx, XLS, all these different files that you're presented with. I'm going to click into PDF. Now this drills down into event label. Now this is the actual file name of the PDF file that has been downloaded. So you can automatically see how valuable this report is to your team in understanding what files are being downloaded and how many of them are being downloaded. Now you're going to want to look at total events here to understand the volume of downloads. Unique events are something else. I don't recommend reporting using this metric. Just pay attention to the total events here. Now, as we can see here on HUD's website, for the last week, the document 4,000 or 40,001 HSGH, whatever that is, had the top number of events. So it also gives you the percentage share breakdown so that you can easily report on not only volume, but also percentage share. So this is a really valuable report. Now, as Tim mentioned earlier, you also get the option of using a secondary dimension. So let's say I want to understand where on my site are these PDF events happening. Well, you can choose secondary dimension and you can choose page. I'm going to select page, and now I have the actual page where in my primary dimension, I have the actual PDF file name and URL here. Now I know exactly where downloads are occurring on my site. Now, why would this be useful to you as a DAP user? Well, let's say there's a PDF that's really important to your organization and you want to encourage people to download it more. Well, maybe you discover that you're not getting a lot of downloads because of where it's positioned on your page. Perhaps you need to put and host the PDF on a different page. So perhaps there could be another page that you could host a bunch of different PDFs on because other users are already going to that page to download PDFs. So there's a lot of different ways that you could slice and dice this data. But this is how you should start thinking about events. So this is simply the interactions with content. They could be PDFs, they could be emails, link clicks, outbound links, etc. So this is a super useful report. I highly recommend for any new DAP users, once you have access or as you're getting ramped up with DAP, definitely go to the top events page within the navigation. And this is going to be one of your best reports to use for understanding automatic tracking of PDF events. So this is how you get your downloads. So super useful. Okay, so quick question for everyone to ponder. Now, we typically ask folks to, in the chat box, put their answers, but this time around, we're just going to kind of think about this together as a group. And I won't ask you all to put anything into the chat box, but as a group, just to yourselves, think about this. If you were to include a direct link to a PDF in an email or social media post, it will not record in Google Analytics. So let me repeat that. So if you include a direct link to a PDF in an email or social media post, it will not record in Google Analytics. Ask yourself why that is. And then is A, B, or C correct? So I'll just give you a few seconds to think about that, and then I'll let you know what the answer is. And I think this is a really important distinction to make because you'll likely get this question from your stakeholders internally at your agency. So just take a few seconds to think about this. Okay, so the answer to this specific question about why a PDF would not be recorded in Google Analytics if you're linking directly to it from an email or social media post is A, PDFs cannot execute Google Analytics JavaScript. So think about it this way. if you're creating an email campaign and you're creating a direct link within that email campaign to the PDF file itself on your website, when a user clicks on that link and loads the specific PDF, because it's a PDF file and it's not actual code, HTML or JavaScript code within an HTML page, Google Analytics has no way of tracking that. So what this means, and what the best practice is to include a link to the actual landing page that's constructed in HTML where the DAP Google Analytics script lives, so that when your user hits that landing page and then they click a link to download the PDF, that PDF link click will be recorded as an event. So this is an important distinction to make. Google Analytics JavaScript cannot execute within a PDF file itself if you link directly to it from an email campaign or a social media post. So you're typically going to want to use a landing page in any type of email campaign or social media post. In addition to that, you'll be wanting to use campaign URLs. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a few slides. Okay, so one more caveat around events. Now, previously, Tim had talked about bounce rate. So again, bounce rate is just simply the percentage of single page sessions. One thing to note when you are looking at reporting on bounce rate in DAP is that when you look at your reporting for bounce rate, you need to consider how many events happened within that session. So remember how much we said that we hate a high bounce rate? Well, in most cases, if someone only visits one page, but they click a file download, for example, or they click an email link, for example, it does not count as a bounce. So the use case is I land on a page, I interact with some content, and then I decide to download a PDF. Now, if I go to that one page and I download a PDF and then I still leave that page, that's no longer considered a bounce. So that's a pretty important concept to keep in the back of your mind as you're looking at your data. This is why analytics is challenging. There are a lot of caveats. There are a lot of ways that you can interpret the data and a lot of things that you need to be aware of when you're interpreting, because there are a lot of ways to misinterpret the data. And you just have to know and learn over time so that you have context around what your data actually means. And this is an important distinction to keep in the back of your mind as you go through your Google Analytics journey. Okay, this is one of my favorite sections of our presentation for you all today. This is looking at how to answer the who and the how question. So what are these? Well, who, this is your audience, right? So let's talk about what Google Analytics tells you and what it can't tell you. So Tim already mentioned a few of these in the beginning, but I think it is worth repeating a lot of these. Now, what you get from Google Analytics about who your audience is, you can understand whether they are new versus returning users, right? You can understand if they hit your site one week and if they return the next week. You can understand that interplay between how they're engaging with your websites and returning. You understand the language that they're actually using in your site, right? That's taken from the browser. You understand the location from which they're browsing your website. It's typically based off of IP address. Now within DAP, we anonymize IP addresses, so to minimize and not collect any PII. That's why we do that. You get to understand their ISP, so their internet service provider. You get to understand what types of sites are actually referring traffic. So these are going to be third-party sites that send traffic to your site. You get demographics data, assuming you've implemented that with your DAP Google Analytics implementation. So this is going to be age bands, male, female, and then you also get interests. Now, how you use that data, that's really going to rely on what types of questions you're trying to answer. But the important thing to know is that this data does exist and that you have access to it. And how you engage with it is going to entirely depend on what questions you're specifically trying to answer. Now, let's talk about what you are not able to know about your audience. So anything personally identifiable information, we do not collect. Google forbids it. IP addresses, like I mentioned before, we anonymize those so that we have no PII in our account. Now, we don't know what's going through your user's head as they click through. We don't know their cat's name. There's a lot of things that we don't know about your users. But what's most important to realize is that we do get a lot of questions about how do you prevent personally identifiable information from being collected. Well, in DAP Google Analytics, we do not collect any PII. The only way that PII could, in theory, be collected is if your specific website CMS somehow passes PII in the URL string. So it is really important to work with your developers on your site to ensure that PII is not in any way passed through the URL string in your CMS. So let's talk a little bit about the who question. Let me just walk you through really briefly within the audience section of DAP. Now, it gives you a good little overview of the audience section. Now, I always recommend going to the overview first to see what types of data are available. Clearly here, it gives you users, new users, sessions, sessions per user. Now, as Tim mentioned in the beginning, there are some challenges with reporting on users. Typically, I do not recommend folks use absolute numbers because of the reasons that Tim had already mentioned about different devices, different cookies, defining the user. I typically like to report on percentage share of users, not absolute numbers, because data is directional. This is not accounting. This is directional, and it's about identifying trends. So typically, you would want to come into the overview section of audience. This is going to give you language of the browser that folks are using to browse your website. You're going to have access to country. So you can look at top countries where traffic is originating on your website. You can even drill down into city, right? And then you have a whole host of other dimensions available. So we've got system, we've got browser, operating system, etc. Service provider. Now, one thing to note about service provider, and this may be a little bit more of an advanced topic, but if you ever get any questions about filtering out internal traffic from your agency, so these are folks who are at your agency and they're browsing the website, but they're not your primary audience, right? Your primary audience is outside of your agency. So what you can do is you can actually create a segment that says, show me the service provider of whatever the case may be. It could be, for GSA, it could be General Services Administration. So every government agency will have a friendly name that you can identify within service provider, and then you can actually create a segment that identifies that service provider and excludes that traffic from your reporting. Now, if you need more help on setting something like that up, please contact us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov, and we'll be more than happy to walk you through that. Let's continue going through the audience section here. Now, one thing to note, you will also have available mobile data. Now, let me go specifically to the mobile section here. Now, why is this important? Well, we did a study about 1.5 years ago where upwards of 50% of traffic is now happening on mobile devices. Now, that's on average. your data will vary, but it's important to understand how people are engaging with your website, right? The experience that you get on a desktop versus a mobile phone is very different with a website. And you need to understand the trends over time to figure out what's the best user experience for the bulk of your traffic, right? But obviously, mobile phones are fast becoming the first point of entry for most people browsing websites. So this is an important report to engage with and use and help your developers and your UX people understand how people are actually consuming your content on whichever device. Now, I mentioned a couple different reports. I did mention demographics, so let me just walk through these very briefly with you. Here's the age bands, right? And we've got gender. Now, you have to implement demographic tracking with DAP. So if you have any questions about this, or if you don't see any data, please contact us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov, and we'll be happy to advise you on how to implement that. Okay, one other thing, interests. We've got some overview data here in interests. This assumes you've turned on your demographic tracking. This is a report that I typically would not use, but it does help you if this is something that you're trying to answer questions about. You know, it could, in theory, help you identify different affinity categories for your users and your audience. But typically, I won't be going into here to pull any reporting in my types of analysis. Okay, mentioned the language and location section. I'm just going to show you the little subsections here. Really powerful stuff. You can, again, you have a date picker. You have the option of choosing a segment, secondary dimension. There are numerous ways of slicing and dicing this data. I recommend just diving in, playing with stuff, and don't be afraid to break stuff. Just make mistakes and just figure out and see how you can manipulate the data. That's really the best way to do this. Okay. Let's move on to the next section. So this is answering the question of how are visitors finding me? And this is going to deal with acquisition metrics. So let me just get to the acquisition section of Google Analytics. So let's talk a little bit about the how question. So really, acquisition speaks to marketing, right? Or anything external to your site. So this section of Google Analytics simply helps you understand how people externally are landing and entering into your site. And it helps you understand from a 30,000-foot view how users are getting to your site and what those different channels look like. So let's talk a little bit about the default channels report in Google Analytics. But first, I want to go over some nomenclature that we typically use and that you'll see when you get into the reporting. Now, first one is referral. This is simply a third-party site external to your site. So if you have HUD.gov, and let's say there's a blog that links to HUD.gov, that blog, which is on a different domain, that link click over to HUD.gov is considered a referred session. So this is considered by Google Analytics as a referral. So this is anything third party. Organic. So typically you'll hear organic search as the terminology. This is anything from a search engine. So this would be somebody searches for HUD on Google or on Bing, and then they click on a search result for HUD.gov, and then they enter the site from a search engine. So Google Analytics automatically categorizes that as organic. Okay, the next channel is direct. This is simply where you literally type the URL into the address bar in your browser. So you type in HUD.gov, that is considered direct. Now, if you have a bookmark or if there's a large group of people who have HUD.gov bookmarked, that would also show up as direct. So Google Analytics tracks all of that, but it would all be lumped under direct. Now, I should note that there is a lot of noise in the direct channel. There's a lot of different reasons. They get a little bit technical, so I won't spend a ton of time on this, but just know that there have been experiments done that show up to 60% of direct traffic actually being organic search. Now, there's a lot of technical considerations that can cause organic search or other types of channels to be stripped of their referrer, and then they're classified as direct. So you always have to take direct with a grain of salt when you're looking at the data. But just know that direct, in theory, assumes that your users are typing in the address of your website in the URL bar. Okay, next channel is social. So this is simply a user and lands on your site from a known social media source. So there's a lot of social network traffic reporting in Google Analytics. And then also I should note email is also a channel. Now that's going to be defined by campaign URLs, which we'll get to in just a few slides. But email is obviously email campaigns that you control. Okay, so let's jump into the acquisition default channel group report. Okay, so in the left-hand nav, I've clicked on acquisition. I click on all traffic, and then I go to channels. Okay, now just like in every other report, you've got the day picker, you have the ability to add a segment, and you have the ability to add a secondary dimension if you so wish. But out of the box, Google very nicely gives you a 30,000-foot view of all of these default channel groupings. Now, you see here we have organic search, we have direct, referral, social, other. That's a whole other story, which we won't go into today. But just know that if you see an other category, there's potentially an issue with how your campaign URLs are set up. If you think that you may have an issue there or you see another category, we'll be happy to speak about that. It's more of an advanced concept, but feel free to contact us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov. Now, you would also typically see email here as well. And let me see, I'm going to go here and I'm going to choose, let me pull July to see if we can get an email category to show up here. Now, your date range here, all the data available to you here in channels reporting all depends on what types of marketing channels you actually drove. So we see here social as well as email. So those types of channel marketing channel initiatives were happening in the month of July. But then we also see organic search, direct referral. So you won't see every channel here, especially email, unless you're actually doing an email campaign. Now, for whatever reason, there's only 3 email sessions in the month of July, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. But I did want to illustrate the fact that the email channels will change. They will not all be there each month, so just be aware of that. Now, let's say you want to see from a specific channel where users are landing. Now, I'm going to show you how to do this. This is a very common question that we get from new users is, let's say, for example, you want to understand from organic search. So again, these are search engines. Where are users landing on a website? So you're going to have to choose secondary dimension, and then you're type in landing, and then you're going to select landing page. Now you see a whole list of here of default channels and landing pages. And you can start to filter your primary dimension or just organic search. And then you can start to see which pages were most popular in organic search in the month of July. So really powerful stuff. This is how you need to start thinking about it as you go through the channel report and how you engage with the data and how you slice and dice it. Okay. Now, within all traffic, there are a number of other reports. We'll talk about source and medium in just a bit. Tim already alluded to that in the beginning. But I do want to get everyone thinking about the direct traffic question again. Now, I mentioned this is a little bit more of a complicated concept, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on this. But let's all take a few seconds to think about this question. What way or ways is direct traffic inflated? So we've got 5 options here. Which way or ways is direct traffic inflated? So let's take a few seconds to think about that. Don't worry about entering it into the chat box, but I'll regroup in just a few seconds and give you the correct answer. Okay. All right, so the answer to this question is all of these. A, B, C, D, and E can all cause your direct traffic channel to be inflated. So clicks from shortened links. So if you use Hootsuite or Twitter, shortened URLs, you can run into issues with link shorteners. If you have a referral from a third-party site that uses HTTPS and your site still uses HTTP, this could also cause your direct traffic channel to be inflated. If you don't use campaign URLs for Google Analytics on your emails, Google Analytics won't know that these are actual email campaigns, and they'll categorize them as direct. More technical issues, if you're using 302 redirects on site, or if you're using redirect chains, there's a lot of stuff that your developer might be doing in the background that could strip the referrer and then cause traffic to look like it's coming from direct. So it would look like it's coming from somebody who's typing in HUD.gov into the address bar. And then, of course, from mobile apps. This is a perennial challenge for any type of analytics tool. If you're in a mobile app and you click on a link, Google Analytics won't see the referrer that it's coming from a specific mobile app. It'll just look at it like it's coming from direct. So a lot of technical concepts here. Definitely, this is more of an advanced concept. But if you have any concerns or questions, we're happy to help you out over on our support line. Okay, so I mentioned campaign URLs. Let's talk about this. So what are campaigns, first off? Well, campaigns are any external marketing initiative such as email, social media, or paid search. Now, the idea here is that in a campaign, you're including a link back to your site where you want your users to land. This will typically be a page that is encoded in HTML. This should not be a PDF link, as we mentioned earlier, because Google Analytics won't fire when you load a PDF. So really the big question here is, how do we measure the success of our marketing initiatives, of our marketing campaigns back to our site? That's the big question. Well, you use campaign tagging to do that. Now, Google provides you with their handy dandy little campaign URL builder. I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. Now, we're going to share the slides, so you will get a link to this. But this is another complicated concept, so we're going to try and break it down for you to make it more manageable. So let's talk about what are campaign URLs. So campaign URLs are simply the URL that you share in a marketing campaign, whether it be email, social media, or paid search. This is the URL pointing back to your site, but it includes Google Analytics campaign query parameters. Now, these parameters instruct Google Analytics to record the data that is meaningful to you. So if you look at this example, mysite.com. You clearly see a question mark, and then you see a UTM source, a medium, and a campaign name. Now, this link is a campaign URL encoded link. So in theory, I could use this link in an email campaign, and then whatever values I put within these brackets, this will instruct Google to pick these up and then consume them, process them, and then create a report for you that you can understand, and then slice and dice your data to understand campaign performance. Now, this link is going to take you to the exact same place as mysite.com. It's just that these parameters after the question mark tell Google Analytics, hey, capture this specific data about my traffic. So that's how to think about campaign URLs. So how do we build these things? Well, on the deck right now, I have a color encoded view of how to think about this. Now, this is still the mysite.com example with UTM source, medium, campaign. So let's break these down into little chunks of data. So let's look at this. So in green, we've got mysite.com. This is simply going to be the URL, okay? So this is simply the page on your site where you're sending your users. So again, you only use campaign URL parameters for offsite traffic pointing back to your website. Now in pink, we have the source. This is simply the referring site. This could be an advertiser, a publication. It all depends on the type of marketing channel that you're using. So for example, let's think about this. Let's say you're sending an email campaign. If you wanted to, you could put newsletter as the source. So the source is simply where the user is coming from. If you're doing paid search, you would want to put the source potentially as Google if for paid search ads, because this is where the user is coming from, Google. So this is totally going to be dependent on the context of your marketing campaign and how you've set up your marketing campaign traffic. Okay. Now, medium, this is simply the marketing channels. This is where the user is coming from a marketing channel perspective. So in the medium parameter, in this light gray-green color, you would put email, social, paid search. Okay? And then finally, we have the campaign parameter. This is simply a unique name of your marketing campaign to help you identify that specific campaign in Google Analytics. Now, one thing to note, all of these are case sensitive. The best practice that we recommend you use is all lowercase. There are certain situations where if you use upper versus lower, like with email, where you can run into issues. And that's more of an advanced concept, but as kind of a blanket rule, we recommend folks simply use lowercase so that you comply with all of Google's channel definitions. Now, we've kind of broken this down into bite-sized chunks. Let's look at how this looks in actual Google Analytics data. Okay, so I am under acquisition reporting. Remember, this is answering the how users got to your site. I've gone down to campaigns, and I've clicked on all campaigns. Now, please note this section here that I've highlighted. You'll notice here that you can toggle between campaign, source, and medium. This lines up with what we have here for building campaign parameters. You've got campaign, source, and medium. So whatever you encode your URLs with, your campaign URLs with, will appear in Google Analytics. And this is why it's so important that you encode these using best practices and that you make sure that any marketing channel traffic, any marketing campaign traffic has campaign URLs appended to any URLs pointing back to your site. So let's toggle through these in the HUD profile. Now, I didn't set these specific campaigns up, so the values here, I'm not entirely sure about everything, but it does look like there was a specific campaign name named Email Campaign 2017 December 4th. So it looks like maybe that was an older email that somebody clicked on. But if we toggle into source, we can see there's some very custom data that somebody has entered into source here. But most importantly is going to be medium. So clearly they've used email correctly here, so that now we can dig into our data and identify specific email mediums for different campaigns. And we can bucket it under this one email medium bucket. Now, the cool thing here is that you can start to toggle between these different cuts of the data. So what I typically recommend you look at is source and medium. Now, remember, source is simply where the user is coming from, and the medium is simply the marketing channel or the medium where the user is coming from, whether that be email, social, or paid search. Now, I typically like to do source medium, and then if I want to understand where they're landing, I like to choose the landing page. Now, when you're using acquisition reporting, you always want to look at the landing page. This is where the session begins. So you're never going to want to look at page. You're going to want to look at landing page within your data sets within acquisition reporting. Now, you can see here, this particular source and medium, so this particular email, sent users to this particular link. Now it looks like this is a press release. So this is how you would identify where your email campaign clicks came from, so which email campaign, and where they landed on your website. Now, if you don't use campaign URLs, you will not have any of this data. This is why it's so important that for anything with paid search, with social media, with email campaigns, you need to use campaign URLs. Okay. One thing I do want to call out is Google's campaign URL builder. Now, on my screen right now is a really cool tool that Google provides you for free, where you can enter the website URL, the campaign source, the medium, and the name. Now, this is a good tool to go to when you're trying to test out how you want to set up campaign URLs. It lets you play around with whatever values you want to enter here. I do recommend being cautious with the naming conventions that you set up. Typically, if you're trying to do a lot of different email campaigns, you will not want to do this one by one. You'll want to create a spreadsheet that has a drop-down that lets you create campaign URL tagged links. We've done a webinar on this before where we built a campaign URL builder. If you're interested in something like that, please contact us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov, and we'll be happy to send that over to you. Now, I do recommend using that because you need to make sure that everyone on your team who's doing anything marketing related uses the same methodology so that you're all using the correct campaign source, the correct campaign medium, and a similar campaign name for various campaigns. So you definitely need to have a methodology in place to ensure proper tracking. Okay. One other really useful report in Google Analytics is the referral traffic report. Now remember, referral traffic is simply traffic coming from a third-party site. So the example I used was a blog with a link to HUD.gov. So if you want to understand what external sites are responsible for sending you the bulk of your referral traffic, this is how you would do it. You would go into acquisition, all traffic, and then you would go to referrals. Now I'm looking at the month of July here, and again, we have the date picker, we have segmentation, we have the ability to add a secondary dimension, etc. Now you'll see here, HUDHomestore.com was the largest referral source in terms of sessions. USA.gov was the second largest. And you can start to see the absolute number of sessions here, as well as the percentage share to the total. So this is how you should start looking at referral sources to understand what external sites are sending traffic your way. So super useful report. There's typically some interesting insights that you can glean from the referral traffic report. There may be some internal traffic that you see there. There may be some different external websites, or you may see different news sources that link to HUD.gov. It's pretty interesting to track over time to see what is showing up as a third-party referral source for your data. Okay. One of my favorite reports is the organic search traffic report. Now, again, organic search is any traffic from a search engine. So where do we find that? Well, under acquisition, you go to all traffic, and then you go to channels. Remember this? This is organic search. So you could drill into there, and then you have a list of, in theory, keywords. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But this is where you go to understand how organic search is performing. So let me just go back to the default channel view. So typically you'll see organic search being your largest traffic driver. So typically on average, you'll see 40 to 50% of all of your traffic coming from organic search. This is a super important channel to be aware of. Now, there are certain things that influence your traffic. Google actually has upwards of 500 different algorithm changes that they make over 1 year. You can't control any of that. You need to make sure that you're complying with any of those large algorithm changes. But basically, how your site is built, how you're handling different metadata, all of that influences how your website appears in search results. But typically, you can start to trend out how organic search looks on your website. Now, one thing to note is when you drill into organic search, you're provided with a keyword report. And we're just about to get into this in the next slide. Not provided. Now, check this out. Now, see here, the first keyword within the organic search report is not provided. I'm sure all of you have seen that in your reporting as well. So what does not provided mean? Well, this is the big mystery of Google Analytics search reports. Now, to give you some historical context, back in 2014, Google Analytics implemented the HTTPS protocol across their whole ecosystem. Now, this was to protect users' privacy. So what this means is that Google basically encrypts users' searches on their search engine if they're logged into a Google product, which most of us are typically logged into. So this would be Gmail or any type of Google account. So whenever I conduct a search on Google, I'm always logged in my account, and all of my searches are protected by this privacy feature. Any of these keywords that I search for are not tracked. They're simply listed and reported as not provided. And that is what this means here. So that's obviously a challenge. Now, you do get the data from these not provided searches, but figuring out what keywords are most important to your users is a challenging topic, right? You can't do that in this report. You can just understand high level what percentage share of traffic came from keywords. Now, there will be some cases where you see some stragglers of certain keywords here, but this is dwarfed by the 99% of all traffic and users coming from not provided. So that's one thing to be aware of. So how do we deal with this? Well, you deal with it by implementing Search Console. Now, Search Console is a tool from Google, and it simply gives you access to the back end, in a sense, of Google's infrastructure in terms of their search results. So if you Google Search Console, you will be prompted to create an account and set it up on your website. Now, one thing to note, DAP does not support setting up Google Search Console with your individual website. Because of how DAP is set up, if we were to integrate your specific Google Search Console account with DAP, every website for the federal government, every agency would automatically inherit your keyword data from Google Search Console. So obviously that is not correct, and that would be very unuseful to the rest of the government if we were to implement one website's Google Search Console account. So that is why we do not do that. You do have the option of setting up a free version of Google Analytics and using what we call a PUA to ensure that you have government data in there, or you could just set it up by itself. And then you could implement Google Search Console within that free version of Google Analytics. And then you'd have that data that way. So let's talk more about the search keyword report versus the search console report. Now remember, the search keyword report I just showed you had the not provided. Search Console, they have a bunch of search analytics reports to help you peer into the thought process of your organic search users and what keywords they're actually typing into Google. So Search Console provides you with more insight into what your visitors are thinking when they enter your site. So basically, you use Search Console reporting as a proxy for the search keyword report, which only shows you not provided. So Google makes you go into the Search Console report to identify keywords through the Search Console reporting. Now, search keywords versus search queries. Now let me show you search keywords here. These are the search keywords that you get in Google Analytics. Now, search queries are simply the keywords that people type into Google. Now you'll get a lot of different data within Google Search Console, and you'll be able to understand the number of times a keyword was searched for, etc. So highly recommend setting up Google Search Console. Typically, this is something your developer can help you with. You will need to claim Google Search Console for your specific website, but it is a very valuable tool to connect to. Again, connect this to your independently managed GA account. This is not compatible with DAP. And additionally, to keyword queries, you also get technical monitoring of server errors, 404 codes, different things that Google will tell you that it does not like, that could influence how you appear in search results. So definitely recommend looking into that tool. It's also a great way of managing and uploading your sitemaps to Google so that they know which content to crawl and how to consume it and then ultimately rank it. So it's a great way to influence your site in Google search results. Okay, that was a lot of stuff. So brush your shoulders off, you're doing great. I'm gonna pause for just a bit and ask if anyone has any questions on any of the material. Or Tim, if you could let me know if anyone has put any questions into the chat box, we can then answer any questions before we move on to the next section.
Hey, Freddie. So there weren't any questions that have been already put into the chat box. People can put it in if they'd like. And one thing I wanted to mention that I realized that it kind of makes it seem in our presentation here that Search Console is inherently part of Google Analytics. I just wanted to make the distinction that Search Console has its own separate interface, and you can use Search Console without linking it to any Google Analytics account if you'd like. The distinction with DAP versus your own account is that you can't make the linkage to import the data into our GA account. You can do that with your own, but you could also just choose to use Search Console in its own interface, which gives you all the same information. It's just not in a one-stop shop. So I wanted to mention that. But beyond that, Freddie, there are no questions right now, and we're a little over, so I think we should move to our second break and then finish up.
Okay.
So I think if you move to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Well, we'll take a 5-minute break. Let's come back at 3:10, and then we will finish this out. All right, we are back. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And we are going to finalize, or I guess move through the final section of our presentation today. So now that you've gone through, I talked about in the first section some of the terminology. Freddie showed you a bunch of the different reporting aspects. Campaign URLs are certainly something that everyone should be using if you're not already. And now that you have a little bit of familiarity about just maneuvering around the interface in general, we get to go to the part that I think most people are interested in, that is using the DAP Google Analytics account to show you data for your specific website. And that's sort of the biggest difference between having an independent Google Analytics account on a single website and the DAP Google Analytics account, which contains information from so many websites. So we're going to talk about segments and custom reports, and those are the two best ways for you to get data for your specific site. So segments are a really cool aspect of Google Analytics, because what they do, and this is a pretty cool demonstration, is they allow you to look at your audience by its different features. So unsegmented data, like as you can see here, this person looks all the same. You don't know anything about that person. But what you can do with segments is actually use them to segment out specific audiences. So you could segment for audiences coming from the state of California, or audiences coming from a specific campaign that you set up in your campaign URLs. Maybe, for example, you have a long-running campaign for some type of awareness, and you create a segment just to look at sessions that come from somebody who clicked on a link as part of that campaign. That's something you can do. You can segment for mobile versus desktop users, things like that. So it allows you to take the different traits that Google Analytics is recording as part of the session that it's got all this data, and actually, segment for it, which is pretty interesting. So uh, let's go back here quickly and take a look at our landing page report. So if I go back into behavior, landing pages, and I go here, what we can do is actually in our up in this section right here where we've got the rectangles, we can click add segment, or even I can click in the all users segment and I can unclick it. And it gives us this little bar here. And if I click system, these are all of the segments that come already pre-programmed into Google Analytics for you. So you can look at sessions where there was a bounce. You can look at mobile traffic or mobile and tablet. It's got the different channels of how people got there. So I could put, I'm interested in knowing the organic traffic. I can hit apply here. And hopefully it doesn't take forever because I want to add another segment. So I've got organic traffic here. It represents 55% of all entrances. But then if I want to compare organic traffic to, let's say, referral traffic, I can add that segment separately, and it will do a comparison for me. I hope. There we go. So now you can see, now the report that we had is broken down into our two segments. So we can see organic traffic looking like this, and the referral traffic looking a little bit lower. And for each page, it tells you where this comes from. Now, here's something really interesting that we can derive right from this report. So we know that organic traffic constitutes a lot more traffic than referral traffic. But by doing this segment, what we can see is that this page, in fact, it's the page we were talking about before, the public Indian housing page, has 60,000 sessions that come from a referral versus only 51,000 that come from organic. So I know that this is a page that's being referred to from outside the site a lot. And then we could then I could put on a secondary dimension here. We could see which sites are referring to it. We could go to the referral reports and specify for it. So there's all kinds of things you can do, but this is something that stands out right off the bat. 12% of all the sessions to this particular page come from referral traffic versus only 4% organic. So that's important to know. That kind of thing that you can do. And what's great about the segments is that you can put them on, and then I can go back to any report I want. I could go back to the audience overview, for example, and the segments are persistent throughout the reporting interface unless you go to real time or custom, or you remove the segments. So here, just like when I had the two different date ranges, now I have two different segments of my audience, which I think is really powerful. And one of the segments that I think is probably really important to use, especially if you are doing a redesign or trying to make your site more mobile friendly, is doing a comparison between mobile and tablet traffic and then desktop traffic. And what's interesting about Google Analytics is that they give you by default a mobile and tablet traffic segment. But what they don't for some reason do is give you a desktop traffic segment. Not in what's already built for you. Luckily, we can create one. So here's an example of how you can create it. You can click New Segment, and then we'll give it a name, Desktop Traffic. And then you can choose all of the different conditions that you want your segment to meet in order to create it. Now, what's cool about this is that I'm just going to create one that specifies desktop. But if you wanted, you could get very specific with your audience that you want a segment for. You could say, I only want to see, browsers or people using Google Chrome on a Samsung phone in San Francisco. You could do that. It would get pretty granular, but you can add multiple conditions. In this case, we're going to go down to technology, and I can go under device category, and then you get to choose it exactly matches, contains, or starts with, or all these things. In this case, there's only one thing that it can be. So exactly matches will work, and we'll type in desktop, and you can see when you know the possible returns for a specific dimension, it will preload it for you. So I can hit desktop and then hit save. And now what I did was I specified I want to create a segment where device category exactly matches desktop. And now we can do a real comparison of mobile and tablet traffic versus desktop traffic. They're both nearly 50%. But you can see, for example, and this is really common, that the desktop traffic, these are weekends here, Saturday and Sunday, they dip. It always dips really, really hard on weekends, whereas the mobile and tablet traffic doesn't dip as much. So that's pretty common. And then doing this comparison, okay, we can see it gives us the different colors to show the different ones. In the time period here, there were this many users, and again, this holds true for any report that you go to. So I could go to the geographic report and look at location, and it would still keep those segments there for me so that I could see the differences between the desktop and the mobile and tablet traffic for whatever type of report that I'm looking at. Here you can see it all pretty much follows suit for desktop versus mobile. There's no big changes. But one thing to note as well is that the way it's ranked currently, because I have mobile and tablet first, it's going to sort by mobile and tablet traffic. So I don't know if there's an example here. Let's see, 979. No, it all works the same. Oh, because it's sorting for that. But okay, let me just show you what this looks like. If I go in this this little left-hand section of the rectangle and I get the crosshairs and I drag desktop over in front of mobile and tablet, it will then re-sort the report so that it's actually sorting in descending order by whichever your first segment is. So now desktop traffic is represented by blue, and it's going to sort by that instead of the mobile and tablet traffic. In this case, I think the sorting is all about the same. But in some cases, you'll find that you might have, one page that's really heavily visited with mobile, and when you're doing the sorting, it's like down here at 5 or 6, but then in reality, or in this case, it would be country. So you might have one country that views much more on mobile than on desktop, but if you have it sorted by desktop, it will look lower than if you switch the organization of your segments. So that's something important to remember. Okay, now, what's cool about creating your own segments is that this is where we can create a segment for sessions on our site specifically. So I'm going to click over here and remove this one. And then I'm going to click into the single segment that I have left, and I'm going to show you how to create a segment for your specific website. So I'm going to say New Segment, and I'm going to say HUD.gov Sessions. And we're going to go down here. Now, this is like the sort of section where everything's provided for you. You get to pick what you want. If you can't find it in this upper section, you go down under Advanced, and you can hit Conditions. And then it gives you the opportunity to look for the dimensions that you want to specify. So in this case, we can create a segment, and there's a couple different ways you can do it. But we can create a segment where the host name, or let's say, here's another way you can do it, where landing page starts with HUD.gov. What that means is I'm now filtering where I want a segment where sessions, and I want to include sessions, have to start with HUD.gov. The landing page starts with HUD.gov, meaning that when someone lands in this particular this particular website, it starts with HUD.gov/something. Now, this particular case, a large proportion, 97% of all users actually do that. I think we also have the HUD IG site. So if I said HUDOIG.gov, it will. Now, what's cool about this is it gives you this instant summary of what it actually will look like, how much of your traffic comes from there. Of course, it's taking forever on my particular case. All right, I'm just going to hit save, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to change this and say, maybe I work in the HUD OIG, and I only care about traffic where people are in the HUD OIG website. So then landing page starts with HUD OIG. It's possible that HUD OIG doesn't participate. Aha, it does. So now, let me get rid of this one. So now we've got 1.22% of all users go to the HUD OIG page, or the HUD OIG site, I should say. But now the folks that work at HUD OIG, they obviously want to be able to use this tool to see their data, but it's very difficult to do when 98% of all the sessions are coming from to HUD.gov rather than HUD OIG. So this is a way that if you have a site, or if you work for an agency where there are a lot of sites in your profile, I'm talking like the cabinet levels. If you work at DoD or Commerce or HHS, something like that, you can create this segment that's specific to your site, and it may represent a small portion of all the data in the profile, but then you've got your information for your site. And again, just like I said, it's here, so much fewer users and sessions, but that's okay. And now what we've done is we've put a layer over all the reports that we just saw that make it so that now all the reports that we were looking at are filtered for HUDOIG.gov sessions rather than any particular person traveling to a HUD website that participates in DAP. And here's all the landing pages for HUDOIG now. You can see they don't contain other websites because we specified that the sessions had to be with a landing page that started with HUDOIG.gov. So what's nice about this is once you create a segment, it will save for you always in your segments menu. So I've got tons of segments in here that we've created. There's the one I just created, but on NASA sites and things. And when you create the site, here's a tip as well that I didn't actually see for a long time. If you're creating it, you might want to say segment is visible only in this view. So you can check this little thing saying, I can apply this segment in this view and not necessarily all views, because then it gets a little messy. Like I've got NASA segments that I can put on the HUD profile that doesn't make any sense. So you might just want to say you can put it only in this view. Another thing is that a lot of folks say, okay, well, when I create this, can other people see it? And the short answer is no. When you create a custom segment, it is only available in your account that you sign in with. But what you can do is go to this dropdown and hit share. And if you hit share, it will give you a link. And you can take this link and send it to your colleagues. And when they put the link in the URL bar, it will open Google Analytics and it will ask them to apply it to a view. Now, in this case, see, like it switched over to my personal account, so I have to switch it. And it's a little hairy here. But what you would do then is you would just apply it to, in this case, the HUD view, and then it would populate, you would be able to actually import the template that you set up. So if you set up the template of the landing page starts with HUD.gov, and that's what you want to use, and you want to be able to send that to your colleagues, you can just click share and get the link and send it to them. And as long as they are DAP users themselves, or even just Google Analytics users themselves for some sessions, you have to know which ones work with which, they can apply it to their Google Analytics accounts as a template. That's an important feature. Okay, let's see here. All right, moving on to custom reports. And I should mention also, by the way, regarding segments, both segments and custom reports, we have done 1-hour webinars that focus specifically on these topics. So you can find those in our YouTube channel that we're including in the follow-up email. And take a look at what we've done in the past, and we go a little bit deeper dive into it. But I think the main takeaway from the introductory course here is that you want to be able to set up a segment for the site that you specifically are interested in or work on. And that is done by going to the advanced section and under conditions. And you could do it with, I prefer to do it with landing page. You could also do it with host name and say the host name matches HUD.oig.gov. But in this case, I used landing page. Okay, custom reports. My favorite part of Google Analytics. Custom reports allow you to break out of the mold that GA has created for you. You get to mix and match metrics and dimensions at your leisure rather than be stuck with the ones that Google Analytics gives you. So if we go under customization and go to custom reports and I click new custom report, you'll see here you get this interface. And we can give it a title. So let's say I'm just going to make up a report. Let's look at browser use by state. Now, this is a made-up one. I don't think this probably has much value for anybody, but just as an example of how you can compare or how you can compile your metrics and dimensions. So there are four different kinds of custom reports. The funnel report, which we'll go over last, is only available in the paid version of Google Analytics. So if you use a free version, you won't have the ability to use the funnel report. But we'll start out in the Explorer report. And what the Explorer report basically means is you get to see one dimension as a default. You get to set one dimension that you see at a time. And then you drill down through those dimensions to see other dimensions. And this will make more sense when I do the report here. So we can add in any metrics we want. We could add in bounce rate or entrances, or I'm going to use sessions and average session duration. Let's use that. I'm just going to pick these two metrics, and then we want to see first browser. And then because I said I wanted to see information about the state, remember I told you that for location, region in the US refers to state. So now I can add, okay, so here's what I've got here. I've got the sessions and average session duration. First, it's going to show me a report that starts with browser, and then when I click into a specific browser, it's going to break it down into region for me. This is the basis of an Explorer report. Now here's the bread and butter down here. Just like we set up a segment to specify for a specific website, we're going to do that with a filter as well. And so here I'm going to use the host name dimension, and I can say I want to see this report specifically for host name exact HUD.gov. So now I'm clearing out that information from HUD.oig.gov and also any other websites that are available in the HUD profile that participate in DAP. I'm just going to focus on this one website. So that's what the report's showing me. I'm going to have two columns for sessions and session duration, but the first dimension will be browser, and then if I click through a browser, it will show me region, and it will only be for the hostname of HUD.gov. And for the heck of it, let's say I'm only interested in seeing traffic from the US as well. You can add more than one filter. So let's say I add another filter for country, and then I can say United States. Okay, so I'm going to hit save, and we're going to get our report. Excuse me. So now, here's what we've set up. There's my columns, sessions and session duration. Here are my different browsers. So there were over 1 million visits in this time frame to HUD.gov from Chrome. The second one is Internet Explorer and then Safari. Now what I've done here is I've set up the Explorer report. So if I click into any one of these, let's say I click through the Firefox one, it's then going to go and take a look here, 68,756. That 68,756 is the total sessions from Firefox. So when I click through Firefox, it then shows me still all 68,756 sessions, but it breaks it down by my second dimension, which I set as region. So now, and especially since I said it has to be in the United States, we're not going to see regions from outside the US, but now we can see a breakdown of by state, what were the most popular visits from using Firefox. So let's see if it changes at all between the different browsers. For Firefox, we've got California, Texas, New York, Florida, Ohio. I'm not sure if it's going to change. Those are pretty populated states, so it might just be based on population. But California, Texas, New York, Florida, Ohio. Okay. So now I'm going to go back and let's look at Chrome. Aha, it changed a little bit. Ohio, so what we found here is that Ohio folks are more apt to use Firefox than, not necessarily more than Chrome, because I think still more of them use Chrome, but they use Firefox at a higher proportion. Because now I've got California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois. So, this is a report that I just came up off the top of my head, but you can then do comparisons of, okay, well, are there differences between the various different dimensions that we set up? And your dimensions can be anything that Google records. It could be referral sources, source medium, whatever you want to see. This is just two kind of dimensions that I just decided to have fun with. So we could obviously go back and click through any one of the browsers and see which of the states had the most visits with that browser. But that's an Explorer report. Now, what's interesting about the Explorer report being only able to, by default, see one dimension at a time is that, for example, Chrome users from Kentucky may have more sessions than Internet Explorer users from Georgia, but we can only see data from each individual row. So when I click through Chrome, I only get to see information about the Chrome users. When I click through IE, the same. So there's a different kind of report that allows you to have a separate row for every dimension you have set. And that is the flat table report. So if I go up here to edit, and you'll see this is where I've set up, where you choose your report type. What's nice is that if I already have a report set up, I can just click flat table. And you'll see it changes a little bit. So now we've got the dimensions on top and the metrics on bottom. It kept my filters. Let's just see what happens here and how this looks different. So note here that now the report shows me a different row for every unique combination. So now instead of just saying Chrome, Firefox, Safari, IE, it says Chrome users from California represent the most sessions. And, here's our first different one. Safari users from California, there were 56,000 sessions from folks using Safari in California, which is more than the 46,000 from people using Chrome in Illinois. So this kind of report, and I can expand it up to however many rows I want. This kind of report is the kind of one that you would use if you want to do an export. Like if you're looking to export data into a spreadsheet and do visualizations off it or something like that, I would recommend putting all your dimensions in a single report, getting something it'll end up being many, many, many more rows, because obviously in the Explorer report, when I started with just browser, it only had, what, 10 rows, something like that. This has 825 rows because it's taking into account every unique combination of browser and state. And the more dimensions you add, the more rows you're going to get. But then you can export it. And let me show you how that works. You can export into PDF, which looks basically like the screen we're seeing here, or into Google Sheets or Excel, or into a CSV file. And that is a way that you can then make pivot tables. If you are into making visualizations out of spreadsheets, and Freddie did a great webinar on that a while back that you'll get a link to, you could use it for that as well. But it just gives you more of the columns of data that you need that represent dimensions, rather than if you tried to export something with, say, 3-dimension layers from an Explorer report, it wouldn't work correctly because you wouldn't be able to sort it all at once. You'd have to sort it only by each dimension. So that's the benefit of the flat table report. Now we can talk about, I'm going to actually skip the map overlay report because I don't ever really use it. It's basically just something that shows you location on a map. It gives you the chart, but then it also shows you the location on a map. So you can play with it if you'd like. You can set it to a map that shows you the whole world or just the US. It's not something that I use all the time. It seems like it's pretty much just a little bonus with a map there. But I do want to cover the funnel report. So the funnel report, and I have a separate tab so we can show you this. Here's a funnel report that was done by some folks at the Department of Education that they shared with us a while back. And I think it's a really good demonstration of what the funnel report does. So this particular funnel report is based on the College Scorecard site, which is at collegescorecard.ed.gov. And the College Scorecard site is designed to be something that prospective college students can use to be able to compare tuition and location and all different kinds of aspects while they're choosing a school that they want to apply to. And it's sort of an aggregator source rather than making the prospective students have to go to all the individual universities' websites and dig up that data. It's a pretty cool site. But what they wanted to do was find out how many people landed on the homepage, did a search for a school that did not include the name of the school, and then click on a specific school, click back to the search results, and compare it to a second school. So this is basically, they wanted to take a look at the user flow and figure out how many folks are putting in some sort of search term, checking a school out, and then going back to the search results and checking out another school. And that's just something that they felt was important for their goals and their strategy and understanding their user journeys. So we'll start out with what the report looks like, and then I'll show you a little bit how it's built. But you can see here, 40,000 people in this date range started on the homepage. And then of that, 16,954 did not perform a search. So they fall out of the funnel. They're down here now. And that doesn't mean they left the site. It just means that they didn't go on to perform a search. So 57.88% of the 40,000 make it through to perform a search. So that's 23,295. From step 2, the next thing is clicking on a school from that search. They retained 62.4% of the 23,000. They lost 8,700 there. Again, doesn't mean they left the site, although they may have left the site, but it just means they didn't go from step 2 to step 3, and so on and so on. And what you get, and it's a little hard to see here because it's really light gray, but you can see at the end when you have this 5th step, it gives you 7.66% of the 40,000 people that started on the homepage made it through to the final stage. So this report is awesome if you have intended user journeys on your site. Especially if you have things like online forms, you could set up steps for different sections of the form and find out where the most people are dropping out of your form. Maybe it's because you're asking them for information that they need to go look up elsewhere, or you've got language that's confusing, something like that. If you have any intended user journey, setting up a funnel report is a great way to be able to see how much of your users go from step 1 to whatever ending step is. And again, we've done a webinar on custom reports before, so I'm not going to go too deep into how it's set up, but I'll just run through it quickly. This particular report, we've got here, they land on the home page. So they set up the specific thing for, actually, let me show you some of the advanced options first. They made it a closed funnel, meaning that they have to enter from the beginning of the funnel. If you had an open funnel, it means that they could enter at any point during the 5 steps. So in some cases, I've seen funnel reports where step 3, a lot of people come in because they Google search for a specific term, and they don't start at, say, the home page, but they start at step 3, and you can leave it open so that you can see where those people are coming in and if they make it to the end. You get to choose between users or sessions for your metric, and you can say the subsequent stage needs to be immediately after or at any time. So that means, like, if I get distracted and I start at step 1, but I go visit some other stuff, and then I come back and complete step 2, you could choose whether or not that counts in your funnel. And then they set it up here. Starting out, landing on the home page. The landing page is collegescorecard.ed.gov. Exactly matches. Then they perform a search. So step 2 is the page includes /search. Now notice here, they're not saying exact, they're using regular expressions. We've done a whole webinar on regular expressions. It's a little bit complex, but encourage you to check that out if you want to learn more about regular expressions. Basically what this means is the URL, so the page, has to contain /search somewhere in it. So stage 2 is they do a search. Stage 3 is they click on a school. So in this case, all of the College Scorecard school information pages contain /school. And it might be /school Texas A&M, it might be /school Clemson, /school UCLA, whatever, but they set it up so that they know that if it has /school in the URL, they're looking at a school page. Stage 4, they go back to search, and stage 5, they go back to a school page. So once you understand what's going on, it's a relatively straightforward setup. And then by setting up those 5 stages, they get that report on the funnel that we saw. So that's pretty cool. I have a link here to our 1-hour webinar on custom reports, and as I noted, I encourage you all to check it out. Here's a little chart of the differences between the custom reports. Obviously, we talked about Explorer versus Flat Table. The funnel report is its own separate beast, but the thing to take away is that Explorer is good if you want to look at one dimension at a time. Flat Table is good if you want to do export or see multiple dimensions at a time. And funnel report works best for measuring completion of a journey. Okay, so a question for y'all to just think in your head. What should you keep in mind when analyzing traffic type? And I'll give you a hint that it refers back to another question that we covered before. And I would just say, if you're analyzing traffic type, remember that direct traffic can be very inflated for various different reasons. Okay, We're almost done, but there's definitely something important that we need to review here, and that is sampling. So I'll go back to my report that I made. Let's go ahead and just do this. And I've got, my time rate date, I'm sorry, my date picker range right now is set at a month. Oh, here's the map overlay report. I guess I didn't change it there. Let's go back to a flat table. Okay, so right now I'm just looking at 30 days of data. A very important thing to note in any report, whether it's a custom report or in the normal reporting interface, is this little green shield. If that green shield is there and it's green, it means the report was based on 100% of sessions. Now, watch what happens if I take the same report and I extend the date range a lot. Like maybe I'm going to look at a lot of months of data. Ah, it stayed green. Well, I think we have we don't have a picture here. If this particular shield turns yellow, I'm going to try to make it happen. You will see that it is a warning that's telling you, here we go. If it is yellow, it is a warning that your report is being sampled. And the more granular your data gets, or especially if you're doing a report on events, and events reports as custom reports are really helpful because when you're looking in the normal events section, it's including all events from all pages. If you basically recreate the exact same events report that Freddie showed you in top events, but you put a filter on it for your specific website, it gets really powerful. If you happen to see this yellow sampling shield, it means that you're being sampled. And if you hover over it, it tells you the percent of sessions with which it's using to base the sample. And in this case, because I just kicked it back 3 years, it's looking at less than 0.01% of sessions to give me this data. So that is very unreliable. In that case, you need to make a judgment call. If you hover over the yellow shield and it says the report's based on 87% of data, probably your exact numbers won't be right, but your ordering of whatever your report is probably pretty good. But obviously, if you're looking at something below 50%, or in this case below 1%, this data is not going to be anywhere near the real numbers. And in that case, when you find that, you have a couple options. Number one is decrease the date range. Number two is remove some of the granularity of your report by removing a few of the dimensions. Or number three is do an unsampled report. So we have this option in DAP that you can go down and click unsampled report. What happens is it will run in the background and it will email you when the report's done. In some cases, it takes 5 minutes. In some cases, it takes 3 hours. Because depending on the report you're trying to run, it will need to spend more time compiling that data. So when your report is done, it will be filed here in the unsampled reports section, and you can click on it and view it. Now, I will give the general sort of advice that I would not do an unsampled report on the report that I just had going back 3 years. I would not do reports on 3 years back, period, even with unsampled reporting. The longer you go back in time, the harder it is for for Google Analytics to get you accurate numbers. If you must run an annual report for 1 year, do an unsampled report. Make sure that you're getting the best numbers you can. I don't recommend ever doing any reports more than a year long. Okay, so that's unsampled reporting. Generally, strategy-wise, something to keep in mind before we leave today, don't rely on single metrics. Ask yourself, what's your agency's mission? How does your site accomplish part of that mission? What are the questions you're trying to answer with your site? In terms of deciding KPIs, what are the things you want your users to achieve? But then beyond that, when you're reporting, who am I giving the report to, and how can this data influence our approach in the future? So we see a lot of folks that do reporting for the sake of reporting. meaning we send a report to my boss once a month that states how many page views we got, and that person files it away or maybe sends it out on an email blast that no one ever reads. If you're using Google Analytics just to get reports and not to understand why those metrics and dimensions show what they do and what you can do to improve them, and you don't have goals for your site, you're not using it to its fullest extent. So try to use Google Analytics to create better user experiences and make sure you're achieving goals on your site, rather than it just being a stack of numbers that you can file away somewhere. We used to talk a little bit more about dashboards, but we have another webinar on dashboarding tools, so I'm not going to go over too much of it. And the last thing that I'm going to show you beyond the export is the email option. So you can pick any report that you are in, and in the export section, you can also choose to email it, and you can set a specific time frame, like you might want to do it weekly or monthly, and the date range will actually change for you. So if I set up my date range to the last 30 days, and then I send this report weekly, it will update to the last 30 days up to that week every time it creates the report. And it does it by default for you, so you don't actually have to go in and export it. That's a cool feature if that's something that you need to do. The last thing, as I noted, huge difference between reporting and analysis. Make sure that you're trying to use this to make improvements to your site. Okay, I had to kind of cruise through that last session, so we made sure we had a little bit of time left for questions. But are there any last questions? Freddie, have you found anything in the chats?
We don't have any questions in the chats.
Oh, wow.
We're happy to take some now if anyone has anything.
And as Freddie mentioned before, for those of you that have questions that maybe you don't want to ask here, you are more than welcome to email us separately, and we'll hash it out with you one-on-one. All right. Well, if there's nothing there, then I will leave you with this last slide, which is a bunch of different resources that you can use. We've got the link to our playlist. We've got this custom segments webinar, the custom reports webinar, all the different ones that we think will be the next step for you as you're trying to go on your analytics journey here. And there's also some information on the things that we do. With that, we will see you for our next webinar, and we thank you for sitting through. I told you in the beginning that it wasn't going to be the full 3 hours, but 2 hours and 52 minutes. I guess we had a lot of information to give you. Please reach out to us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov, and keep an eye out on the DAP listserv as well as the digital.gov events page for our upcoming webinars. As I noted, we try to do one almost every month, if not every month. So thanks for hanging with us, and also thanks to Jeremy Ziller and the DigitalGov University team for making this webinar possible. We will see you all next webinar.